Hermione Granger and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 13. The Very Secret Diary. Hermione had to give her credit. Madame Pomfrey barely flinched as Ron and Harry led Hermione into the hospital wing. "You've gotten yourself into quite a predicament," she said simply, as she ushered Hermione down the hall with one hand and shooing Ron and Harry away with the other. The skilled, yet harried healer led Hermione to a somewhat secluded area behind a curtain. "Sit," she instructed, and Hermione perched herself on the cold metal stool next to the hospital bed. Her tail, however, got in the way, and Hermione nearly toppled over. Madame Pomfrey caught her without looking and helped her to right herself. "Miss Granger," she said, starting a chart and then staring Hermione down with a very matter-of-factly look. "I'm not concerned with, nor am I obliged to, administer any potential discipline that would be deserving of whatever it is that you did. I adhere to strict confidentiality rules, and therefore, if whatever it is you did will remain just between you and me, unless, of course, there is a possibility another student is in danger. Do you understand?" Hermione nodded. "Right. So with that said, I need to know exactly what you did so I can know how to fix it." Hermione gulped and fought the urge to start licking herself. "Polyjuice potion," she meowed softly. Madame Pomfrey did a double take. "Polyjuice potion?" she exclaimed. "Aren't you a second year?" Hermione nodded. "And you were able to brew Polyjuice potion?" Hermione nodded again. "The rumors were true about you, weren't they?" the healer asked, no one in particular, as she marked something down on the chart. The healer allowed herself a moment of bewilderment, but now it was back to business. Hermione wondered what rumors Madame Pomfrey had heard. After a thorough examination, Hermione was instructed to change into pajamas and into the hospital bed out in the ward. As she walked to what would be her bed for the next few weeks, she caught sight of Colin and Sir Nicholas, laying stone-like in side-by-side beds behind a curtain. If Madame Pomfrey hadn't been right behind her, she would have lingered longer. Perhaps their petrified bodies had held a clue. Hermione vowed to sneak back to look when Madame Pomfrey wasn't so close. As someone smart and patient enough to brew one of the most difficult potions in existence, you should already know that there are no guarantees when it comes to species metamorphosis with Polyjuice potion, Madame Pomfrey said. Hermione felt her ears flick. "However, in my 20 years at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, I have seen it all and treated it all. The transition will not be an easy process, Miss Granger, but I do believe it will be a successful one. I will need your complete cooperation. Is that clear?" Hermione nodded again. "Good," Madame Pomfrey said. "We will begin tomorrow. I suggest you get your rest." The following few days were some of the most painful Hermione had ever experienced in her life. Their physical transformation back to her human self wasn't entirely done by magic. For example, Hermione's feline-like teeth had to be filed down daily, though Hermione made the most of this by accidentally letting Madame Pomfrey file her teeth a little more than she should have. There was a flurry of rumor about her disappearance when the rest of the school arrived back from their Christmas holidays. Of course, everyone thought that she had been attacked. So many students filed past the hospital wing trying to catch a glimpse of her that Madame Pomfrey took out her curtains again and placed them around Hermione's bed to spare her the shame of being seen with a furry face. Hermione had taken it upon herself to write letters to all of her professors, notifying them that even though she was in the hospital wing for the foreseeable future, she was perfectly willing and able to keep up with any and all schoolwork. All of the professors were happy to oblige, giving her work to Ron and Harry to bring to her and sending her letters of support. A personal get-well letter from a certain Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher almost made the whole fiasco worth it. Almost. "If I'd sprouted whiskers, I'd take a break from work," said Ron, tipping a stack of books onto Hermione's bedside table one evening. Don't be silly, Ron. I've got to keep up, said Hermione briskly. Her spirits were significantly improved by the fact that all the hair had gone from her face, and her eyes were turning slowly back to brown. She missed being in class, but on the other hand, really enjoyed the independent learning she had been doing. Not only could she learn at her own pace, but she also didn't have to feel the eyes of her classmates on her. The class mudblood. I don't suppose you've got any new leads? She added in a whisper so that Madame Pomfrey couldn't hear her. Nothing, said Harry gloomily. I was so sure it was Malfoy, said Ron, for about the 100th time. What's that? Asked Harry, pointing to something gold sticking out from under Hermione's pillow. Just a get well card, said Hermione hastily, trying to poke it out of sight, but Ron was too quick for her. He pulled it out, flipped it open, and read aloud. To Miss Granger, wishing you a speedy recovery from your concerned teacher, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin's third class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. Ron looked up at Hermione disgusted. You sleep with this under your pillow? But Hermione was spared answering by Madame Pomfrey sweeping over with her evening dose of medicine, which was absolutely disgusting. She'd much rather drink the vile Polyjuice potion instead, and that was saying something. In all of her downtime, Hermione had been working on a mixture of schoolwork and research about the Chamber of Secrets. A few days before she was to be discharged from the hospital wing, Hermione had a very special visitor. Professor McGonagall! Hermione exclaimed, sitting up a little straighter in her hospital bed and pushing the various books under the blanket. Hello, Miss Granger, Professor McGonagall replied in her usual curtness. I trust you're feeling better. Oh, yes, thank you, said Hermione, extremely relieved not to have a face full of fur. Good to hear. We've missed you in class. No one has been answering my questions, Professor McGonagall said with a rare wink and half a smile. But never mind all that. What's important is that you're doing better. Oh, yes, much, Hermione said. Madame Pomfrey said I should be able to leave in the next few days. Excellent. Professor McGonagall looked slightly awkward for a moment. I would assume whatever jinx that landed you in the hospital wing is not something I, as the head of Gryffindor House, should be privy to? Hermione stuttered. I'll take that as a no, Professor McGonagall said. In that case, I implore that you keep whatever it is that you did to yourself. Gossip tends to run rampant here in Hogwarts, and I always end up finding out. I don't want to have to take any points from Gryffindor. And please pass that along to Mr. Potter and Mr. Weasley, since I'm sure they were involved. Hermione nodded, her cheeks burning. Yes, Professor, she said quietly. Now that we have that out of the way, I'd like to discuss another matter with you. Professor McGonagall took a seat on the folding chair Ron had pulled over earlier that day during his daily visit. The Chamber of Secrets. I'm assuming you have been trying to do research, judging by these books you have put under the blankets? Hermione's blush intensified. Yes, I've been doing a little light reading. I suppose if I was in your shoes, I would do the same, Professor McGonagall sighed. Unfortunately, some wizards consider blood status a matter of importance, even in these modern times. It just seems to be more prevalent now with all that is going on here at Hogwarts. But I assure you, they are the minority. You will always be welcome in the wizarding world. In a rare show of emotion, Professor McGonagall placed her hand on Hermione's arm. In fact, you are more of a wizard than they will ever be. Hermione felt tears stinging her eyes. Thank you, Professor. That means a lot. Right, Professor McGonagall said stiffly and stood up quickly. With all that said, please be careful, both in your research and just in general. And please do not get into any more trouble with your friends, Mr. Potter and Mr. Weasley. If the three of you find out something, Please promise me you'll come to me instead of trying to handle it yourself. I promise, Hermione said, but her fingers were most certainly crossed under the blanket. Through her research, Hermione had uncovered something called a pure blood directory that, quite frankly, made her sick to her stomach. Written sometime in the 1930s, the book was published anonymously in Great Britain and listed 28 families judged to be pure blood by the anonymous author, who is widely believed to be Cantankerous Knot. He dubbed these families the Sacred 28. Hermione scanned the family names of the Sacred 28, recognizing quite a few of them from her fellow classmates. Malfoy, Abbott, Bulstrode, Longbottom, and Weasley, to name a few. The heir of Slytherin, conceivably, should be a part of one of these families, since she doubted whatever magical enchantment Salazar Slytherin placed on his chamber would allow anyone but a pure-blood witch or wizard to open it. Hermione pulled out her favorite quill and, refraining from swatting the feather and parchment, to create a list of all the current students who were members of the Sacred 28 families, and essentially potential suspects. Anna Abbott, Hufflepuff. Millicent Bulstrode, Slytherin. Flora Carroll, Slytherin. Hestia Caro, Slytherin. Sullivan Foley, Hufflepuff. Marcus Flint, Slytherin. Daphne Greengrass, Slytherin. Neville Longbottom, Gryffindor. Ernie Macmillan, Hufflepuff. Draco Malfoy, Slytherin. Theodore Nott, Slytherin. Pansy Parkinson, Slytherin. Fred Weasley, Gryffindor. George Weasley, Gryffindor. Ginny Weasley, Gryffindor. Percy Weasley, Gryffindor. Ron Weasley, Gryffindor. Hermione found it quite peculiar that the Weasleys were part of the Sacred 28 on both sides of their family. Weasleys on their father's side and Prute on her mother's side. Then, quickly weighing the pros and cons, she added Harry's name to the list. The Potter family was excluded from the list because Henry Potter took an outspoken pro-Muggle view during his time in the Wizengamot. Hermione thought this was just done purely out of spite, and Harry should not be excluded. If Draco didn't know who the heir of Slytherin was, that probably excluded the Slytherins. Hermione knew there would be no conceivable way a Slytherin could be the heir without Draco knowing. He and his father were too important to be left out of the loop. That left Hannah Sullivan, Neville, Ernie, Harry, and the Weasleys. Hermione immediately dismissed the idea of Harry, Neville, or the Weasleys being the heir, which left Hannah, Sullivan, and Ernie. Hermione's stomach turned. It was much easier to believe a Slytherin was responsible. She started to dive into the suspects. Ernie had definitely not cast a great impression that day in the Great Hall. Also, he was the one who had a problem with Harry after the duel incident, but he could have just been projecting. He seemed to be good friends with Justin Fletchley, which made it hard to believe he'd put his friend in danger with a Slytherin monster. But maybe the heir didn't have complete control over who the monster attacked. Hermione wasn't too familiar with Sullivan, though she knew he was friends with Ernie and Justin as well. She made a note to pay more attention to him when she got out of the hospital wing. Hermione had appreciated Hannah diffusing this situation with Ernie in the Great Hall and had a generally good impression of her. She also knew from past conversations Hannah's mother was a Muggle. She'd like to believe that having a Muggle parent would make someone a bit more compassionate towards Muggle-born witches and wizards. Hermione found it hard to believe Hannah would be the one responsible for all of this, unless she was possessed. Hermione gasped. That was also a possibility. She wasn't exactly familiar with the magic involved with possession, but she knew it was plausible. Hermione had no choice but to bring back Harry, Neville, and the Weasleys into the list with possession mixed in. She didn't want to think about the ramifications of someone she was so close to turning out to be the heir. So Hermione table the hunt for the suspect and turn her attention to the monster itself. What kind of monster could petrify its victims? What kind of monster could petrify an animal, a ghost? Why was there always water on the ground? And what was the deal with the spiders? Hermione had requested Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander from the library. Yet another one of her school books from the previous year that didn't make the cut so she could bring all of Lockhart's books. And finally, just received it. She cracked it open and began to scan the pages within. Alphabetically and coincidentally, the first beast mentioned was an acromantula. Hermione's mind flashed back to the row of spiders crawling along the window right after the attack on Mrs. Norris. She read further. Acromantulas were a giant magical species of spider, native to the rainforests of southern Asia, particularly Borneo, where it inhabited dense jungles. Acromantulas were believed to be a wizard-bred species, designed to guard dwellings or treasure hoards, and were first created before the ban on experimental breeding in 1965. These giant spiders, with a taste for human flesh, were first spotted in 1794. Certainly, the bit about guarding dwellings or treasures piqued in Hermione's interest, but nothing in Newt Scamander's comprehensive book mentioned anything about the petrification of victims. Still, she wrote down the bits to look into some more later. One could never do too much research. Hermione continued down the list, writing down notes about various beasts and monsters. Another creature that caught her eye was the basilisk, a monstrous serpentine creature. A basilisk could kill its victim with both its potent venom and its huge yellow eyes, which are immediately fatal to any creature who looks at them directly. Likewise, a cockatrice, a mythical two-legged serpent-like creature with a rooster's head, can kill its victims with a glance as well. Though it wasn't included in Scamander's book, Hermione wanted to do some additional research about Medusa from Greek mythology. She was familiar with the story in the Muggle world and had a hunch Medusa had something to do with the wizarding world instead of just being a mythical story. Medusa, generally described as a winged human female with living venomous snakes in place of hair, would turn any who gazed in her eyes into stone. In Hermione's educated opinion, Medusa would check all the boxes. Serpent-like hair, which would tie in with the Slytherin mascot, turning the victims to stone. She'd make sure to reserve a book on Greek mythology when she was able to get out of the hospital wing. At the beginning of February, Hermione left the hospital wing, de-whiskered, tailless, and fur-free, and with much more manageable front teeth. On her first evening back in Gryffindor Tower, Harry showed a very peculiar diary and told her the story of how they had found it. There we were, out in the hallway, near Myrtle's bathroom, and there was water everywhere, Harry said. We went in, and Moaning Myrtle was moaning about someone throwing something at her, and this was just sitting there. And see here, Ron pointed to a name written in the front page in smudging ink. T.M. Riddle. He got an award for special services to the school 50 years ago. How do you know that? Hermione asked, surprised Ron knew something about history that she didn't. Because Filch made me polish his shield about 50 times in detention, said Ron, resentful. That was the one I blurped slugs all over. If you'd wipe slime off a name for an hour, you'd remember it too. But there's nothing else written in it, Harry continued. How does a 50-year-old diary just randomly show up in an out-of-order girl's lavatory? Oh, it might have hidden powers, said Hermione enthusiastically, taking the diary and looking at it closely. Well, if it has, it's hiding them very well, said Ron. Maybe it's shy. I don't know why you don't chuck it, Harry. I wish I knew why someone did try to chuck it, said Harry. I wouldn't mind knowing how Riddle got an award for special services to Hogwarts either. Or could have been anything, said Ron. Maybe he got 30 owls or saved a teacher from the giant squid. Maybe he murdered Myrtle. That would have done everyone a favor. The thought hit Hermione like a lightning bolt. From the look on his face, Hermione could tell the idea popped into Harry's head as well. What? Said Ron, looking from one to the other. Well, the Chamber of Secrets was open 50 years ago, wasn't it? Said Harry. That's what Malfoy said. Yeah, said Ron slowly. And this diary is 50 years, said Hermione, tapping it excitedly. So? Oh, Ron, wake up, snapped Hermione. We know the person who opened the chamber last time was expelled 50 years ago. We know T.M. Riddle got an award for special services to the school 50 years ago. Well, what if Riddle got his special award for catching the heir of Slytherin? His diary would probably tell us everything. Where the chamber is and how to open it and what sort of creature lives in it. The person who's behind the attacks this time wouldn't want that lying around, would they? Oh, that's a brilliant theory, Hermione, said Ron, with just one tiny little flaw. There's nothing written in this diary. But Hermione was pulling her wand out of her bag. It might be invisible ink, she whispered. She tapped the diary 3 times and said, Parisium. Nothing happened. Undaunted, Hermione shoved her hand back into her bag and pulled out what appeared to be a bright red eraser. It's a revealer. I cut it in diagonally, she said. She rubbed hard on January 1st. Nothing happened. I'm telling you, there's nothing to find here, said Ron. Riddle just got a diary for Christmas and couldn't be bothered filling it in. Hermione's research continued, both about Medusa and the mysterious T.M. Riddle. They took a quick trip to the trophy room to see if they could find any other artifacts mentioning Riddle's name. They found Riddle's burnishing gold shield Ron had polished tucked away in a corner cabinet. He didn't carry any details of why it had been given to him. Good thing, too, or it would have been bigger, and I'd still be polishing it, said Ron. However, they did find Riddle's name on an old medal for magical merit and on a list of old head boys. He sounds like Percy, said Ron, wrinkling his nose in disgust. Prefect, head boy, probably top of every class. You say that like it's a bad thing, said Hermione. Why Ron didn't value those things were beyond Hermione's understanding. Having received a medal for magical merit, Hermione made an easy assumption that T.M. Riddle must have been involved with the chamber opening 50 years ago in some sort of capacity. It was too much of coincidence that he'd received the medal the same year the chamber had been opened and the student who was responsible expelled. Her research into Medusa wasn't going as well as she had hoped. Hermione could not for the life of her find any reference to Medusa in any Wizarding World book. She was only mentioned in the various Muggles books. She decided she'd ask Professor Binns or Professor Burbage, the Muggle-studied professor, if they could shed any light on Medusa's role in wizarding history. The sun had now begun to shine weakly on Hogwarts again. Inside the castle, the mood had grown more hopeful. There had been no more attacks since those on Justin and nearly had a snake, and Madame Pomfrey was pleased to report that the mandrakes were becoming moody and secretive, meaning that they were fast leaving childhood. The moment their acne clears up, they'll be ready for reporting again, Harry heard her telling Filch kindly one afternoon. And after that, it won't be long until we're cutting them and stewing them, and you'll have Mrs. Norris back in no time. Perhaps the heir of Slytherin had lost his or her nerve, thought Hermione. It must be getting riskier and riskier to open the Chamber of Secrets with the school so alert and suspicious. Perhaps the monster, whatever it was even now settling itself down to hibernate for another 50 years. Nonetheless, Hermione persevered, and continued to solve the mystery with as much research as she could manage. Eddie Macmillan was still convinced that Harry was the guilty one, and he had given himself away at the dueling club. Hermione kept an eye on Ernie from afar. The fact he was so vocal about Harry's guilt seemed like a red herring to Hermione. Gilderoy Lockhart had been diving into the mystery as well. Hermione surmised he had been doing a lot of investigation on his own. She overheard him telling Professor McGonagall all about it. I don't think there'll be any more trouble, Minerva, he said, tapping his nose knowingly and winking. I know the chamber has been locked for good this time. The culprit must have known it was only a matter of time before I caught him. Rather sensible to stop now, before I come down hard on him. You know, what the school needs now is a moral booster. Wash away the memories of last term. I won't say any more just now, but I think I just know the thing. He tapped his nose again and strode off, Hermione's eyes on him as he left. Lockhart's idea of a morale booster became clear at breakfast time on February 14th. As soon as Hermione walked into the Great Hall, she was overcome with the spirit of love. The walls were all covered with large pink flowers. Heart-shaped confetti was falling from the pale blue ceiling. Everything looked so amazing. Lockhart must have spent all night on the decorations. She hoped he hadn't been too busy to read the valentine she left him. What's going on? Harry asked him, sitting down and wiping confetti off his bacon. Ron pointed to the teacher's table. Lockhart, wearing lurid pink robes to match the decoration, was waving for silence. Hermione turned completely in her seat so she could see him and give him her full attention. Happy Valentine's Day! Lockhart shouted. And may I thank the 46 people who have so far sent me cards. Yes, I have taken the liberty of arranging this little surprise for you all. And it doesn't end here. Lockhart clapped his hands, and through the doors to the entrance hall marched a dozen surly-looking dwarfs. Not just any dwarfs, however. Lockhart had them all wearing golden wings and carrying harps. My friendly card-carrying cupids, beamed Lockhart. They will be roving around the school today delivering your valentines. And the fun doesn't stop here. I'm sure my colleagues will want to enter into the spirit of the occasion. Why not ask Professor Snape to show you how to whip up a love potion? And while you're at it, Professor Flitwick knows more about entrancing enchantments than any wizard I've ever met. The sly old dog. Hermione clapped her hands and squealed with glee. She had never been a fan of Valentine's Day, but it was hard not to be with all the beautiful surprises. Ron, however, found a way to not be excited. Please, Hermione, tell me you weren't one of the 46, said Ron as they left the Great Hall for their first lesson. Hermione suddenly became very interested in searching her bag for her schedule and didn't answer. All day long, the dwarfs kept barging into their classes to deliver valentines, to the annoyance of the teachers and also to the annoyance of Hermione. After a while, it did get tiresome. Late that afternoon, as the Gryffindors were walking upstairs for charms, one of the dwarfs caught up with Harry. Oi, you! Harry Potter! Shouted a particularly grim-looking dwarf, elbowing people out of the way to get to Harry. Harry tried to escape. The dwarf, however, cut his way through the crowd by kicking people's shins and reached him before he'd gone 2 paces. I've got a musical message to deliver to Harry Potter in person, he said, twanging his harp in a threatening sort of way. Not here, Harry hissed, trying to escape. Stay still, grunted the dwarf, grabbing hold of Harry's bag and pulling him back. Let me go, Harry snarled, tugging. With a loud ripping noise, his bag split in two. His books, wand, parchment, and quill spilled into the floor, and his ink bottle smashed over everything. Harry scrambled around, trying to pick it all up before the dwarf started singing, causing something of a holdup in the corridor. Hermione knelt down to help him. She could see Harry was extremely uncomfortable. What's going on here? Came the cold, drawling voice of Draco Malfoy. Harry started stuffing everything feverishly into his ripped bag, desperate to get away from Malfoy before Malfoy could hear his musical valentine. What's all this commotion? Said another familiar voice as Percy Weasley arrived. Losing his head, Harry tried to make a run for it, but the dwarf seized him around the knees and brought him crashing to the floor. Right, he said, sitting on Harry's ankles. He is just singing Valentine. His eyes are as green as fresh picked pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine. He's really divine. The hero who conquered the Dark Lord. Hermione could tell Harry was extremely embarrassed, but he tried to laugh along with everyone else. Percy Weasley did his best to disperse the crowd, some of whom were crying with mirth. Off you go, off you go. The bell rang 5 minutes ago. Off to class now, he said, shooing some of the younger students away. And you, Malfoy. Hermione and Harry saw Malfoy stoop and snatch up something. Leering, he showed it to Crabbe and Goyle, and Hermione's heart dropped. Draco had Riddle's diary. Give that back, said Harry quickly. Wonder what Potter's written in this, said Malfoy, who obviously hadn't noticed the ear on the cover, and though he had Harry's own and thought he had Harry's own diary. A hush fell over the onlookers. Ginny was staring from the diary to Harry, looking terrified. Hand it over, Malfoy, said Percy sternly. When I've had a look, said Malfoy, waving the diary tauntingly at Harry. Percy said, as a school prefect, but Harry had lost his temper. He pulled out his wand and shouted, Expelliarmus! And just as Snape had disarmed Lockhart, so Malfoy found the diary shooting out of his hand into the air. Ron, grinning broadly, caught it. Harry, said Percy loudly. No magic in the corridors. I'll have to report this, you know. They all ran to Professor Flitwick's class through the chaos. Hermione thought she caught sight of Ginny running down the hall, or at least someone with flaming red hair. Harry's books were absolutely covered in ink from the tussle with the dwarf in the corridor, except for T.M. Riddle's diary.